The rear main seal, otherwise known as the crankshaft seal, is responsible for sealing the output shaft of an engine. It is located between the back of the engine and the front of the transmission, and on most cars requires the entire transmission to be removed in order to replace it. However, because the Jeep 4.0 is the best engine ever, you can replace the rear main seal by simply removing the oil pan, and that's what I'll show you in this video. The 4.0 is known for its tendency to mark its territory. The rear main seal, or RMS for short, is a common failure point for oil leaks, so if you have engine oil leaking from the front of your transmission bell housing, the RMS is the #1 culprit. It could also be the back of the head gasket or clutch fluid for manuals. As you can see, I have a drip pan here because this is almost as much of a mess as my friend group after my ex started hopping homies. If you've never done this before, be aware this is by far incomparably the messiest project you'll ever do under this thing. Last time I did it, I was covered in grease from head to toe, and it took multiple showers to make myself presentable again. When replacing the RMS, you'll also need to replace the oil pan gasket, and depending whether yours is dented or rusted out, the oil pan itself as well. This is also an excellent opportunity to replace the oil pump and any other bottom-end internal components. The RMS saw a redesign in 2000, so 4.0s from 1987 to 99 will have this style seal with 2 tabs on either side of the lower half, and 2000 through 06 4.0s just use 2 half circles. I'll be covering both types in this video. For reference's sake, I'll be primarily working on this 2001 XJ, and as differences present themselves, this 1987 MJ. Here's all the tools we're going to need for the job. We're going to need sockets from 8 to 19 millimeter, a whole slew of wrenches. As for deep sockets, we've got 1/2 inch, we've got 7/16 and 13/16. This is the important one you need. We need a scraper. I also kind of use this little thing as a scraper. Flathead screwdriver, a brass punch that closely matches this surface area, the rear main seal. This is not brass, but brass punches were not working for me the first time. So if you don't have a brass punch, all you need to do is be extremely careful. We're going to need mini pliers to get cotter pins out, torque wrench, mini ratchet, breaker bar, pickle fork, etc. A drain pan, a jack and jack stands. As for consumable products, we're going to be replacing the oil pan gasket, the rear main seal, of course, and this Felpro gasket comes with these little alignment pegs that help keep it on the bottom of the engine while you're installing it. They're actually really helpful. You're going to need anaerobic gasket maker for 2000 plus models. It's a specifically designed high temperature stuff. So we're going to need cleaning supplies, be that through paper towels and brake clean. You're going to need a fresh set of oil and an oil filter. You're also going to need some dish soap. You'll see why later. And of course, a stress relieving beverage of your choice, because this is a terrible job and I don't ever want to do this again. Firstly, if you have any skid plates, aftermarket steering setups, or anything that might hinder your ability to reach around under here, make sure to get that all out of the way. I'm making this video mostly because every other one out there is done on a lifted Jeep that either has plenty of clearance between the engine and axle, or just conveniently doesn't have a front axle. Yeah, let me just take out the axle real quick. Some forum posts suggest you have to remove the exhaust downpipe, but if you live in the Rust Belt and your exhaust bolts look anything like this, that's not really an option. So even on the dual catalyst manifolds, this is entirely possible without removing any exhaust components. Start by blocking the back wheels and set the parking brake. Disconnect the battery at the negative terminal. Raise the front end of the vehicle and support it by the frame rails. Disconnect the starter and remove it. Different years have different starters, so the connectors you see here may not apply. The lower bolt is 9/16 and the upper bolt is 15 millimeter. The starter then slides out the bottom. On the Comanche, I removed the vacuum canister to get a bit more room to get the starter out. Drain the engine oil and may as well replace the oil filter because this isn't going back in there. Detach the steering linkage from the pitman arm or the steering dampener from the drag link and just move it out of the way. Optionally, you can remove the transmission inspection cover. You don't need to, but it will give you a little bit more room. On Renix models, you can't actually remove the inspection cover. I don't know what year this changed. It could be in '89 with the transition to the AX15, or it could be in '94 when they switched to an external slave cylinder. So I don't really know where your cutoff years are for this, but some models, this plate is actually the whole thing between the engine and transmission, so I can't take this out on the MJ. Support the axle with a jack, remove the wheels, and disconnect the shocks either from the top or bottom. Also disconnect the sway bar links. Allow the axle to hang free. If you have an automatic, start by detaching the transmission lines from each bracket and mounting them to the oil pan. You don't need to unplug the lines, they just need to be loose. But if you have a manual, you obviously don't need to remove the transmission lines. There is a considerable amount more room without them in the way. Unscrew all the oil pan bolts and keep track of where they go. An age-old trick is to have a cardboard box handy, cut slits on the top, and use that as a stencil to store each bolt. It's 87 through 2000 models with federal emissions are not going to have an O2 sensor wire bracket hanging here. At least I don't think. You can reach the bolts behind the exhaust by using a universal joint extension. This is way easier with the single manifold. There are different sized bolts on the four corners. It's important to note that on 99 and newer Jeeps, the two rearmost bolts hold this oil pan support bracket. It's questionable how essential this thing really is, and as you can see, I actually had to break it to get it off of here the last time. The rubber is dry rotted and this needs to be replaced, but unfortunately the entire world is out of stock on these for the next 30 years. So this one will have to do. I have a link in the description in case they're ever produced again. The oil pan might be stuck onto the engine, in which case using light hits from a soft mallet should break it free. Rest the oil pan on the axle and don't remove the oil pickup tube. So here's our problem. The oil pan is obviously completely disconnected, but there is no way in hell you are getting this out of here. No way. This does not clear this or the upper control arm. It is hitting the axle, the upper control arm, and the inspection plate cover slash bell housing. There is absolutely no way that you can just slide this out on stock height. Stock height, 100%. No way. I've even tried this. The last time I did this, I was on 1.5 inches of lift. Still completely impossible. Not possible. There's video proof right there. You are not getting this oil pan out. I don't care how hard you swear at it. So, the first time I did this, I wasted 5 hours of my life trying to figure out how to get this out of here and basically lost faith in humanity. But one savior from an ancient internet forum recommended this bad boy. This is the spare tire jack. We're gonna shove this right on top of the axle and crank it down so it pushes against the frame rail so that we can push the axle lower than it is hanging freely so that we have enough room to get the oil pan out.
Got it.
The hardest part of that is the damn transmission lines. But it's possible. Video evidence right there. Man, I got into an argument on Facebook with some guy who said the oil pan is supposed to just slide right out of there without jacking the axle down. Man, So on the Renix model, I had to remove the entire airbox system so I could get to the upper shock bolt because I was not screwing around with those ones. Now that the entire axle is lowered from both sides, look at that, easy. Oh, it just slides right out, does it? Next, remove the 14 bolts securing the main girdle. Note that on 1987 to 95 models, there is no main girdle, so you can just skip this step. Remove the rear main bearing cap to gain access to our two-piece rear main seal. Oh yeah, that's under tight. You can also rotate the crankshaft if the cylinder 6 connecting rod is in your way. Rock the bearing cap back and forth, not side to side, to get it off. Make sure you remember which bolts were on what side because they have to be reinstalled in the same spot. Forward and backward. There we go. Optionally, you might want to loosen but not remove the main bearing caps for cylinders 4 and 5, as this gives the crankshaft an ever so slight amount of wiggle room that might help you get the top half of the RMS out of there. Using a brass punch, very carefully tap out the top half of the seal. Once it protrudes out the opposite side, grab it with needle nose pliers, being extremely cautious not to nick the crankshaft. So I've done this a couple times now, and it's actually not that bad once you get it down. I was able to get the top half out of there, no problem. My secret tip for you guys is with the punch, I've put it in a 10mm socket on an extension. So that way, when I have this up here on the surface of the rear main seal, this is low enough for me to hit it with a hammer so that I can actually swing on it and get some momentum instead of having to hit it way up there. This is really helpful. Another trick I used last time was loosening the main bearing caps on cylinders 5 and 4 That way the crankshaft can move a little bit and gives it just a little bit of leeway. It might work, it might not, just another thing to try. Now that everything is out of the vehicle, I recommend taking a break. If you're ready to keep going, the next step is to clean off the mating surface between the bearing cap and the engine block, once again being extraordinarily cautious not to scratch anything. On 2000 plus models, the rear main seal halves are exactly the same, so you can't mix them up. What you can mix up is the direction though. One side is flat and one side has a little ridge in it. The ridge always faces towards the front of the engine. On the replacement seal, coat a thin layer of dish soap on the outside only. This will help it slide in easier. On the inside of the seal, coat a thin layer of engine oil. So, you're probably not going to be able to see this very well, but I'm going to use this paper thing to help guide the seal into its groove so that we don't end up splitting it, because that can totally happen. The metal will cut the seal and then it won't seal properly, and then you'll have leaks again. Using the provided paper alignment tab, very precisely feed the top half into its spot. The lip faces towards the front of the engine. You have to be careful not to catch it on any sharp edges, because the seal will rip and you'll be right back at square one. Only use your fingers to push it into place, as pliers will easily and suddenly slip off the seal, which we don't want. Push the seal in and around the crankshaft until it's seated flush on both sides. No, I was afraid of that. So using the punch on the other side, I was able to rotate the seal backwards a little bit and get that paper out of there. Definitely would not leave that in there, even though it may be very tempting. Also, as mentioned on screen a few seconds ago, do this with your hands. Do not try to push it in there with pliers. Use pliers only for getting it out. See, I kind of needed... You kind of need both hands, and you kind of need to take up all this room. You have to do it by feel, because I don't know about you guys, but I have some big meaty hands here all in the way, so you can't really see what's going on. I only had one available hand because the other hand was holding the camera, because none of my friends wanted to bother showing up to help me do this today. So here's our rear main bearing cap and the bottom half of the rear main seal for 2000 plus models. You can see here on the bearing race there is evidence of some foreign material there. That was not on there the last time I did this, so obviously I failed to keep this clean properly. As you can see, there's clearly a spot on here from something. It wasn't there the first time I did this, so obviously I somehow managed to trap a piece of dirt on there, and now the crankshaft is probably scratched, and I probably need a new engine. Truthfully, I have no idea how bad this is, or if I should put it back in, but I gotta make this video, so I'm just gonna ignore it and hope for the best, because that's how my ex deals with her problems. So here's the rear main seal. To get this out, very carefully, mind you, pry it out with a screwdriver. Since this is relatively new, it just kind of comes right out. There's oil all over in there, very clearly leaking. So I'm going to scrape off this surface and clean out the inside of where the rear main seal rides very carefully. Do not scratch the metal. For the bottom half, remember the lip faces towards the front of the engine. This is just gonna nicely seat in place. Just like with the top one, we're not gonna put any RTV or oil on the outside of this lip. You'll have to use anaerobic gasket maker very sparingly on the edges here, because too much will mess with your torque specs and the angle this thing sits at. Make sure you use anaerobic gasket maker. I was only able to find it online, linked in the description. Here we've got the older style seal. You can see there's 2 tabs on either side of it. I broke this one off because how I'm going to go about getting this out of here is I broke off that one side and grab it with needle nose pliers, and that's how I got it out. Now for you it's probably going to be a lot easier. You can just grab it by the tab and pull it out. For the older style seals, you don't need any sort of RTV. This just simply slides in here, and it should only fit one way with the lip facing towards the front of the engine. Now, you totally can put RTV on the edges here and underneath those lips as well, but when I took the old one out of here, there was no evidence that there was ever RTV in here, so I'm just going to put it in dry like this. You can now reinstall the bearing cap with the bolts in the same locations. The bearing cap has a torque pattern, alternating between the 2 bolts. Torque them to 40 foot-pounds first, then 70, and then finally 80. Remember to also torque any of the other bearing cap bolts you might have loosened. Okay. Reinstall the main girdle. I'm not sure if this is directional, but it doesn't seem to be. Each of these nuts are torqued to 35 foot-pounds. You're going to need to take some time to clean the oil pan. I spent quite a while scraping off the old gasket from around this lip, and I sprayed out the innards with brake cleaner. If your oil pan is dented at all like this, take a flat piece of wood and pound it back flat. I kind of already did that to, I don't know, it sort of worked. So what I'm going to do in this situation is just use a little bit of extra RTV right here. You wouldn't typically put RTV on the main flat surfaces here. I'm going to put RTV in this circle and around the timing chain cover and in this area right here, but the rest of it just goes on a dry gasket. Use RTV at critical points on the oil pan, like the front where it meets the bottom of the timing chain cover and the back where it cups the rear main bearing cap. You can also line up the oil pan gasket. I used 2 zip ties on either side of it to help keep it in place. So I kind of realized after filming everything and doing the job twice over that I kind of forgot to mention where on the gasket to put RTV exactly. So I've drawn an outline of the oil pan gasket here. You especially want to make sure to put RTV around this area on both sides. This is where the bottom of the timing chain cover gasket meets the oil pan. Because there are 2 solid gaskets meeting there, you're going to need some liquid RTV in both of those places especially. I would also put some along the corners here just for good measure, and also a nice stripe along the bottom of the timing chain cover. Now you're also going to want to put some potentially in the lower, the back ring on the, you know what I'm talking about. It's 3D for you. But anyway, I'd put a strip along there and also a little bit extra on either edge of that. And that should be good. So this is what I did for both applications and it works fine. On the XJ, my oil pan is dented right here, so I actually ran a little extra RTV right here, and everything works fine. So in fact, the MJ didn't have an oil pan gasket on it. Whoever put it in there last just did RTV around the entire thing. There was no solid gasket, so you could do that too if you wanted, but I wouldn't recommend it because you're going to hate yourself the next time your rear main seal goes out. Easier said than done. Somehow get the oil pan back under the engine block. Using Velcro's provided plastic inserts on the 4 half-inch bolt holes, the pan and gasket snap into place and held nicely. Oh, it's a pain, and it took 2 of us to finagle it on there correctly. But our 4 plastic tab things are holding the gasket and oil pan in place. So I'm gonna cut these zip ties and then just start bolting it to the engine block. Now that I've got a couple bolts in, I'm gonna remove the spare tire jack so we stop putting all sorts of unnecessary strain on the front axle components. Next, start installing all the pan bolts exactly where they came from. When you've got more than a few in, you can remove the plastic alignment sticks with a flathead screwdriver. The 7/16 bolts are torqued to 11 foot-pounds, and the 1/2-inch bolts go to 7 foot-pounds. There's really not a pattern for these, but if you alternate sides, it'll help ensure the gasket seats as it should. If you have an automatic, remember to secure the transmission lines too. Reconnect the shocks and the sway bar links, put the wheels back on, and reattach the steering linkage. If you removed them, install the inspection cover and the starter. Lower the vehicle back onto the ground, and don't forget to add engine oil. Finally, reconnect the battery and start it up. Inspect for leaks, go on a test drive, and check everything once again. Hopefully that rear main seal will last until the end of days, because by God, after doing this 3 times now, I am done. Next time it leaks, I'm taking it to a mechanic. What a project this was. Thank you all for watching, and if you have any tips I didn't mention in the video, be sure to comment what you got, because this is a really miserable experience. I actually saw an XJ on Craigslist a while ago that was for sale because the guy got halfway into this project and gave up. So, if you manage to do this successfully, I'd consider you a persevering mechanic. Good luck out there.